Breaking news today: NATO must not give Vladimir Putin an opportunity to drag out the conflict. Russia's war in Ukraine was a major topic at this week's NATO summit in Lithuania's capital. Now that Sweden's membership is almost certain, everyone is wondering what will happen with Ukraine and the alliance. Ukraine is hoping to be extended an invitation. The leaders of NATO disagreed on whether or not to make an offer. A summit communiqué stated that they had reached an agreement to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance, though it was unclear when or how this would occur. Concerns have been raised about whether or not Ukraine's membership in NATO would actually deter a future Russian invasion of the country. NATO members need to ask themselves if the potential downside is worth the potential upside for the organization. Personally, I don't think we'll know the answer to that until the war is over. Since an invitation to join won't speed up that process, raising the issue now serves neither NATO's nor peace's best interests. While hostilities persist, not even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky can argue that NATO membership should be granted to Ukraine. That would immediately pit NATO against Russia in open conflict. US and allied leaders have made it clear they have no interest in starting World War III by taking the fight directly to a nuclear-armed Russia, despite their strong commitment to Ukraine's security and billions of dollars in military aid. Those members of NATO who support Ukraine's eventual accession want a firm and expedited timeline for Ukraine's membership once the war ends. This is especially true of NATO members who share a border with Russia, like Poland. They think that preventing future Russian aggression, either against Ukraine or NATO countries directly, requires a clear path for bringing Ukraine into the alliance. Still others have a different opinion. While the United States is certainly the most outspoken, it is not the only NATO member that sees these assurances as gratuitous provocation of Russia. It's not just the Germans who have been hesitant to make that promise. While preventing NATO from being drawn into the conflict is of utmost importance, these allies advocate for a strong show of support to Ukraine, including more material commitments. They see little benefit in risking further provoking Russian President Vladimir Putin by committing to a specific timeline for Ukraine's future membership. It would be mostly for show if we made such a pledge. Neither would it alter NATO's current level of support for Ukraine, which is substantial. The Ukrainian government, military, and people could probably use some encouraging news as the long-awaited counteroffensive continues in fits and starts, and this would be the greatest benefit to Ukraine's cause and NATO's corresponding interest. You can't dismiss this as unimportant. The morale of the Ukrainian armed forces has been crucial in their victories over the much larger Russian military. Challenges for Kyiv could be exacerbated by war fatigue. However, the price of such a morale boost would be a major deterrent to Putin accepting a ceasefire. Putin's control over Russia may be weakening after the failed mutiny in June. Putin may find the support from the Russian public and political class he needs for this war in the imminent threat of Ukraine joining NATO. According to a new survey by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the Levada Center in Moscow, one of Russia's last remaining independent polling firms, 7 out of 10 Russians said that NATO membership for Ukraine would threaten Russia, and preventing it is a top benefit of Russia's military action in Ukraine. Many Russians may rethink their support for the war if it means Ukraine joining NATO. This internal NATO debate is reminiscent of one that occurred at the NATO summit 15 years ago, when the US wanted to offer both Ukraine and Georgia action plans for membership but Germany opposed them as being too confrontational. Due to the lack of a unified stance, Ukraine and Georgia were given the worst of both worlds. Sufficient provocation of Russia without any additional protection. Within a matter of months, Russia invaded Georgia, and a few years later, it invaded Ukraine. From this result, reasonable people can reasonably conclude different things. Supporters of Ukraine joining NATO argue that doing so would have deterred Russian aggression at the time. Opponents maintain that Russia was swayed to join because of the possibility of future membership. However, unlike in 2008, Russia is currently at war with Ukraine and has established strongholds across large swaths of Ukrainian territory. In the short term, we must prioritize ending war rather than preventing it. To be clear, I do not believe that NATO made Putin do it argument, but I do think that promising to admit Ukraine after the war ends would be a barrier to Russia accepting peace, and I also think that NATO allies today can't know if Ukraine's membership will be a benefit or a burden when peace finally comes. Ukraine may be dissatisfied with leaving Vilnius without a clear path forward, but in the long run, this is the best decision for peace and the interests of NATO's current members.